At the moment I can't see a commission that would be in the process of, or in the space where it could dare to put forward a report like that. So I do think the context has changed, and I think in a way it was very sad. I don't put it down specifically to that context, that prime minister, that time. I put it down to a more general difficulty that government has to address this most crucial issue. What does the economy look like and what's it for? Interestingly, now we have a prime minister who stood on the steps of Downing Street and said, I'm going to change things. I'm going to create an economy that works for everyone. And, she borrowed that language actually from some of the people that we work directly with on exactly these issues of questioning the economy, questioning the basis of the economy, and trying to make it work differently. So in principle, there should be a more receptive ear than there was at that particular time and context. But I still find it. I still find you can have some of that conversation with government. What should an economy look like, particularly when it's working for everyone? Perhaps when it's working in difficult financial or economic circumstances. But as soon as you pitch that in a very precise way around growth, that's when the conversation becomes much more difficult. And that's been true of most governments over the last half century, 60, 70 years. So it wasn't about Gordon Brown at that time, but clearly that it was interesting in a way, because one of our advices from Treasury at that time was, I think this might be the time at which you could begin to raise this difficult question. This was 2007 when we were thinking about it, because we've basically got growth fixed.
Sorted that. So now we could question whether we need it.
Now we can ask these more difficult questions and think about these wonderful things like sustainability. And it was the same year in which Gordon Brown said we have the longest period of sustained economic growth in 200 years. And it was just, it was extraordinary, really, in terms of the hubris involved in that situation. And I think one of the most interesting things in the 10 years since then is that hubris has been challenged, increasingly, as has the idea that a growth-based economy and a growth-based economics is ours as a right. We've actually now, even in the mainstream economics, begun to come round to the possibility that a low growth or even no growth environment could be a new normal. It's not a comfortable one. Politicians are no happier with it now than they were before, but actually very mainstream people are talking about it.
But if it is the inevitable, or we can't avoid it, then giving politicians something to sell it with, of course, they'd have to be totally changing their messages and changing how they're talking, wouldn't they?
Well, that's right. I mean, first of all, you've got to get off your sort of addiction to the G word in a way. And actually, I think that's quite an interesting strategy. It's what when I work with people who sort of say to me, look, my context is one in which I can't challenge growth in this way because it's just a given. So, in the financial sector, in investment sector, in policy, in all sorts of places where there's an understanding that growth comes before everything, and that when you make a speech, you pay homage to that word.
Yeah.
And when you talk about strategy, you introduce how it's going to help you with growth. There was a point during Cameron's government where he just stood up and said, I'm putting my cabinet on a war footing, and every minister is going to be a minister for growth.
Yeah.
And literally laying it out as a kind of campaign strategy, without ever really questioning either the feasibility or the legitimacy of that. I think that's shifted very subtly because of these arguments coming from the mainstream that actually growth may not be there in the way that we hoped it was or hoped it would be over the last few decades. And that's a point at which, as you say, you actually have to have a kind of a plan B. Okay, so is it going to be there? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. So what's my first job? Maybe my first job is to not be so actually tied into this growth-based idea that I can't let a sentence go by without installing the word growth in it. and just start to nuance that language. And this is what I say to some of these advisors. Look, okay, so you're in that situation, but do you always have to talk about it's going to contribute to growth, or could you perhaps talk about it contributing to an economy that works for everyone, or a more successful economy, or to prosperity across regions, across different parts of the country? Could you use language which doesn't necessarily install the G word at every sentence? And that to me is a shift. That's a kind of different way of approaching the conversation.
And are there any politicians that are picking this up?
Yeah, a little bit. I think they are. I think in a way, even the language of an economy that works for everyone is a different kind of language from the continual pushing of the growth message, which happened very much in the last administration. I think that actually some of what McDonnell says is sometimes questioning of that growth paradigm. So actually, that's very cross-party already. You have the Tories and Labour both, to some extent, being prepared not simply to repeat that mantra as though it will solve every problem. What we don't have yet is somebody seriously prepared to say, actually, we may not have this growth-based economy, so we better start working out what it looks like when we don't get it. And that's, that to me, I used after Prosperity Without Growth was published, and I was doing this kind of round the departments talking about it thing. I would occasionally go, for example, to the Treasury, and I would say, look, I understand all your mainstream models are based around growth. I understand this is important for employment, for security, for debt, for public financing, etc. But couldn't you have just a small corner of the Treasury in which there was somebody working on Plan B? Because actually, this stuff may not work out the way you think it's going to work out at the moment. And I think the interesting thing about the last 10 years is it's kind of shown that in a way. We thought we'd kickstart the economy in April 2009, and here we are, 9 years later almost, and we still haven't quite got back the economy, the growth-based economy that we thought we would get by kickstarting growth in April 2009.